Imagine the biggest sporting event you can think of, the Super Bowl, the World Cup final. Now imagine the star player, the MVP, is the king himself. And in the middle of the game, a freak accident happens and he's killed. That's not a movie plot. That's exactly what happened in 1559, turning the most popular sport in Europe into a royal execution. Welcome back, history buffs. Today, we're diving into the thrilling, glamorous, and surprisingly lethal world of jousting. Forget what you've seen in movies, with knights gently tipping each other off horses. The real deal was brutal, a high-stakes collision of speed, steel, and ego. And for one king, it was the end of the line. So what was jousting, really? In the High Middle Ages, it started as military training. Knights needed to practice their horsemanship and lance control for the chaos of the battlefield. It was essentially a war game, a way to stay sharp between actual wars. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a full-contact military simulation. The goal wasn't just to knock your opponent off, it was to shatter your lance squarely on their shield or helmet. A direct hit, a clean break, that was the money shot. But humans being humans, we love a good show. By the 15th and 16th centuries, jousting had morphed from a gritty training exercise into the premier spectator sport of the European nobility. It became a tournament, a grand festival. These events were massive, multi-day extravaganzas with feasts, music, and of course, the main event, the joust. It was the ultimate display of wealth, power, and masculine prowess. Knights weren't just soldiers anymore, they were superstars. They had custom-made ornate armor that could cost as much as a country estate. This wasn't your standard battlefield gear. This was specialized jousting armor, reinforced on the left side, the side facing the opponent's lance, and often weighing over 90 pounds. The helmets were designed for maximum protection, but this came at a cost, incredibly limited vision. The eye slits, or sights, were often just a thin gap, meaning the knight was essentially charging blind, aiming for memory and instinct. The lances themselves were not props. They were long, heavy poles of solid wood, tipped with a blunted steel coronal to spread the impact. But even blunted, the force of two half-ton war horses charging at each other at a combined speed of 40 miles per hour was catastrophic. We're talking about an impact that could shatter bone, cause severe concussions, and send splinters of wood flying like shrapnel. Broken ribs, collapsed lungs, and fatal falls were all part of the game. It was a blood sport dressed up in silk and steel. Now, let's set the stage for our main story. The year is 1559. The place, Paris. The man of the hour is King Henry II of France. Henry wasn't just a king, he was a jousting fanatic. At 40 years old, he was still athletic, powerful, and utterly obsessed with the sport. He saw it as the ultimate expression of his royal power and virility. The occasion was a grand celebration, a double wedding, in fact, to seal peace treaties with his longtime enemies, the Habsburgs of Spain and Savoy. His daughter was marrying King Philip II of Spain, and his sister was marrying the Duke of Savoy. It was a huge political moment, the culmination of decades of war, and what better way to celebrate peace than with a massive 3-day tournament? On June 30th, the final day of the tournament, King Henry was on a winning streak. He had successfully run against the Duke of Savoy and the Duke of Guise, two of the most skilled noblemen in the kingdom. He was feeling invincible. The crowd was roaring, the sun was shining. It was a perfect day. But Henry wanted one more run. His advisors, and even his wife, Catherine de' Medici, begged him to stop. Catherine, who was famously interested in astrology and omens, had a terrible feeling. A prophecy had been made years earlier by the famous Nostradamus, which seemed to hint at a grim fate for the king. The young lion will overcome the older one on the field of combat in a single battle. He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage, 2 wounds made 1, then he dies a cruel death. Spooky, right? But Henry, full of confidence and royal pride, brushed off their concerns. He challenged a young captain of his own Scottish Guard, Gabriel de Lorge, the Count of Montgomery. Montgomery was reluctant. Jousting against the king was a tricky business. You couldn't try too hard, for fear of injuring the monarch, but you couldn't make it look like you were letting him win, either. He tried to refuse, but a king's command is a king's command. So, they lined up for the final pass of the day. The 2 knights charged, their lances connected, both shattered, which was a good clean hit. But it wasn't clean. As Montgomery's lance broke apart on the king's shield, a large, sharp splinter flew upwards. It found the one weak spot in the king's magnificent gilded helmet. The splinter shot through the narrow eye slit of Henry's visor, the golden cage from the prophecy. It pierced his eye and forehead, driving deep into his brain. The king reeled in the saddle, swayed, and collapsed into the arms of his attendants. The scene descended into chaos. The most powerful man in France was carried from the field, bleeding and in agony. The best surgeons in Europe were summoned, including the brilliant Andreas Vesalius. They did everything they could. They even replicated the injury on the heads of executed criminals to understand the wound's trajectory. But medieval medicine was no match for a brain injury like this. For 10 horrifying days, King Henry II suffered. He was blinded, partially paralyzed, and in excruciating pain. He finally succumbed to a massive infection on July the 10th, 1559. The king was dead. The game had become a royal execution. The political fallout was immediate and devastating. Henry's death threw France into turmoil. His heir, Francis II, was a sickly teenager, completely dominated by his wife Mary, Queen of Scots, and her powerful uncles. The careful peace Henry had built began to crumble. Religious tensions between Catholics and Protestant Huguenots, which Henry had kept under control, exploded into open conflict. What followed were the French Wars of Religion, a series of brutal civil wars that would tear the country apart for the next 40 years, all because of a single wooden splinter in a sporting event. It's a terrifying reminder of how a single moment, a freak accident, can change the entire course of history. And what happened to jousting? The death of King Henry II was its death knell. The sport that had defined an era was now seen as a reckless, deadly liability. While it continued in a much reduced form for a while, its heart was gone. The risk was too great. The glamour had been replaced by a grim reality. The royal sport had killed a king, and it never recovered. So the next time you watch a movie with knights jousting, remember the true story of Henry II. Remember that behind the pageantry and the cheering crowds was a brutal, high-stakes game where the line between sport and death was as thin as a lance splinter. It was a game that shaped an age, and in one fateful afternoon brought it to a crashing, bloody end. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into one of history's most fascinating and fatal sports. If you enjoyed this journey back in time, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that show how the past is always more dramatic than fiction. Let me know in the comments what other historical events you'd like to explore.